Hi, my name is Cassie Petit. I thought before I dive into the heart of my presentation, I would let you know a little bit of background about me. I currently serve as the Assistant Director of Learning and Organizational Development at Northern Arizona University. I've been with NAU for almost 7 years, and prior to working there, I lived in Las Vegas and held a variety of roles in the human resources arena while I worked at both MGM Resorts International and prior to that at Boyd Gaming. If you include my time as a student worker at the University of Iowa in their human resources office, I've been working in this field for 18 years. The human resources, or HR function, of every organization has so many parts to it. There's payroll, benefits, compensation, employee relations, employment, recruiting, training, etc. The foundation of all of these functions for your company absolutely must be your company culture. So let's start with an important question that you might be wondering anyways. Why should you care about any of this? Why should I care about defining culture when I have real work to do? There are so many layers to this question. Why should you care? Like, why should you take the time to define your own mission and company core values? Why should I care can also be asked by your customers or potential customers. Why should I care enough to do business with this organization? Why should I care can also be asked by your employees or potential employees, right? Why should I care enough to make this company a success? So let's start with the foundation of all of these layers that I just talked about, and that's you. We all know that strategy is extremely important for any organization. Your idea for a product, a business, a service is what got you where you are today. The fundamentals of starting a business, things like defining what that product or service it is that you offer, conducting the market analysis, public relations, marketing, and financials are all extremely important. But there also needs to be intentional and strategic thought put into the heart of your business, into defining and communicating out the why of your business. I was half joking earlier when I said the quote about having real work to do, because the culture part of so many organizations seems to have been an afterthought. Or, and perhaps worse, it was something that we came up with to put on our website, or great sounding words to put on a poster, and we hang on the walls, but it isn't practiced. So during this presentation, I have a few activities to get you thinking about your own company culture. But before we get into that, let's look at what some of the literature shows about culture. A Harvard Business Review article stated, "Strategy offers a formal logic for the company's goals and orients people around them. Culture expresses goals through values and beliefs and guides activity through shared assumptions and group norms." That was a lot. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. For example, right now I'm working on a project and we're staffing a brand new team with 5 new positions. So the strategy for this project is, what is the timeline around this new team being up and ready to go? Who's creating the job descriptions for those new positions? What's the recruiting plan, right? If you remember from that quote, strategy is the goals and then orients people toward them. But there's also this culture piece that is equally as important. So the culture piece in my example of creating a new team with 5 new positions is, who is it that we want on this team, right? Who is going to be a good fit for us? Not just in terms of competence and experience, but why do they want to work here? What are their values? Do their values align with our values? And then how do we create really good interview questions to get at that culture piece, to find out what this person's values are and if they'll be a good fit for us? So a few examples of how defining strategy without thought and culture can really cost companies. I'm sure you're familiar with the Wells Fargo scandal, right? So the strategy with Wells Fargo was opening up new accounts. Because the core values and culture hadn't been well defined, it became at any cost necessary. Well, Wells Fargo, not only did their CEO step down, but they were fined about $3 billion. Another example is from Volkswagen. So their strategy was to have low emissions. Without that culture piece being in place, once again, it became at all costs necessary. And not only once, but twice, they created a device that defeated the tests. When that was all found out, Volkswagen's stock price fell about 1/3, and to date, they've been fined about $18 billion. So those are two very extreme examples as to what can happen without that culture piece being defined. But in addition to those extreme negative examples, I also want to share with you some benefits of why it's important for you to define your company culture. Starting with identity. Who are you? You get to set the direction, and by doing that, you set an expectation for all potential employees and customers. Before moving to Flagstaff, I previously worked for MGM Resorts International for many years. I started with that company about a year after they had purchased the Mandalay Resort Group, and they were called MGM Mirage. So let me back up a minute. I start working at the Excalibur Hotel and Casino in around 2006. In 2005 is when MGM Mirage had purchased MGM Resort Group. So MGM Mirage owned properties like the Monte Carlo, New York, MGM, Mirage, the Bellagio. The Mandalay Resort Group consisted of the Excalibur, Luxor, Mandalay Bay, and Circus. So when MGM Mirage purchased Mandalay Resort Group, they became a massive organization. So during my time with the company, I got to witness this massive organization create its new identity. In addition to purchasing and building new properties, the revenue of all of those properties in Las Vegas was looking a lot different than it had in the past. A study was done while I was employed there, so this is about 10 years old now, on customer spend while in Vegas. And what we learned was that about 65% of what guests were spending their money on was not gambling. I mention this because even though it's old data, it helped the company in rebranding its identity. So while I'm there, the company's growing. They know that guests aren't spending all their money on just gambling and shrimp cocktail like they used to, so they knew it was time to change their identity. It eventually got them to the tagline that they use to this day, which is "Welcome to the show," right? It's Las Vegas. It's MGM Resorts International. It is all about entertainment. The "Welcome to the show" tagline, what was interesting is it was used both as an external and an internal identity campaign. So the show, SHOW acronym, stood for the 4 customer service standards that was expected of all employees. And the "Welcome to the show" tagline really was a promise to our guests to keep them entertained while they were there. Once you establish your identity, you will then look for people to hire who believe in that identity. Or, like with the case with MGM Resorts International, you train the people who work for the company to help reinforce that identity. Another benefit to having a strong culture defined is retention. People want to stay and work at places where they feel that they belong. It is so much easier to attract talented people when you have a strong culture. And actually, according to Gallup research, about 71% of millennials strongly agree that they know what their organization stands for, say they plan to stay with their company for another year. That number drops to 30% for those who disagree. Culture can be a more important factor for people when deciding on where to work than salary, at a certain point, of course. And lastly, let's talk about performance. Organizations with a well-defined culture have an advantage over those with a weak culture. I mean, can you imagine having this well-defined culture and mission and values, and everybody at your workplace feels a part of that? They feel personally connected to your purpose. Like, how engaged would your team be? How does that transfer to your clients and your customers? It does take work, but it can absolutely be achieved. So I want to stick with this performance benefit of a strong culture and talk a little bit about this impact and give you a couple more statistics. So according to a 2020 Gallup research poll, your culture drives your ethics and compliance reporting. So I want to go back to that Wells Fargo and Volkswagen example, thinking about their culture, what was reported, what wasn't reported. In fact, statistics from a New Century Financial Corporation indicate that employees who are actively engaged in their job, right? They're happy to be there, they produce better results. I mean, duh. But a really great example of that is account executives at a banking company who were actively disengaged produced 28% less revenue than those who were engaged. Happy workers, those who are engaged, they are also more likely to solve difficult problems faster. And the reason is simple. People who are unhappy, who don't feel connected to their job, they don't tend to do more than just the minimum. Great workers who don't feel appreciated, who don't feel connected, they quit. And poor managers can negatively affect workers and productivity. So I know the saying is that money cannot buy you happiness, but in looking at some of the research around culture, it sure seems like happiness can buy you money, so to speak. So let's talk a little bit about some benchmark companies. I know there's a lot of different companies out there who have strong cultures, but I just chose these three to highlight to give a high-level overview of some great examples. I specifically chose Zappos because when I lived in Las Vegas, I got to tour the facility. They run tours at Zappos all the time. What I think is so cool about that is not only are they living their culture, but they're also showing others how to do it. In fact, if you're a reader, either Audible or to turn the page, I highly recommend you purchasing Delivering Happiness. Delivering Happiness is a great book that was written by Zappos' former CEO, Tony Hsieh. He actually just stepped down from that position a couple months ago after starting the company and being there for 20 years. The whole entire book is about how, for him, defining the culture and the service standards was the most important thing. It's just a company that happens to sell shoes. I also chose REI because I think they've done such a great job at staying true to their mission values, and visiting their stores, from my experience, the people that work there absolutely love their job. And maybe when I think about their customers, it might just be because of where we live in Flagstaff with all the outdoorsy things to do. But I know so many people who are such loyal customers to REI, like plan their entire weekend around standing in line to get first pick at those garage sales. I also wanted to highlight Southwest Airlines and how they live their mission and their purpose through their decision making, which is as it should be. The mission and values of your organization, as I said earlier, shouldn't just be pretty words on your website or on a poster that you hang on your wall. Your mission and values should guide how you make your decisions and how your company operates. So I wanted to share with you Southwest's purpose and vision, just so you can get a feel for what this looks like. So Southwest on their website has their purpose as they want to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel. Their vision is to be the world's most loved, most efficient, and most profitable airline. So let's put all this into practice for you. So I'm going to walk you through a series of activities to get you to start thinking about your own purpose, your own mission, vision, and core values. So it all starts with this question: why do we exist? What I mean by that is, what is your company's purpose? Why are you here and where are you going? To give you an example from another company, Disneyland. Who doesn't love Disneyland? At Disneyland, their common purpose that every cast member needs to know is to create happiness. Every person that works at Disneyland knows that they are here to create happiness and to make magical moments for the guests. And it's not just that they know this, but actions matter. Disney doesn't just say create happiness and then leave everything else to chance. I actually had the opportunity to attend the Disney Institute's workshop on creating a culture of service excellence. And what I learned there was that not only does Disney do a great job at getting publicity by having stories of magical moments out in the public, but they also strategically and intentionally share those stories with all cast members to reinforce the behaviors that are expected. So I went online and found a great heartwarming story from Disneyland I thought I would share with you all just to give you a feel for what to create happiness and magical moments mean. So a woman who was visiting Disneyland wrote this into the park. When I was 6, my autistic brother and I went to Disneyland for the first time. We decided to go on the Peter Pan ride because that's my brother's favorite character. When we were riding the ride, my brother had a meltdown because he was scared by the heights. When one of the cast members saw us getting off, with my brother still freaking out, she came over to us and told us to wait right outside for something magical. After waiting a few minutes, she and Peter Pan came walking towards us. My brother immediately calmed down and became super excited. We took pictures with him and he signed our autograph books. Then he personally escorted us to our next ride, the carousel. My brother was overjoyed. It is definitely my favorite memory from the Disney parks. So earlier I'd mentioned that I worked at MGM Resorts International. And while I was there, as I told you the story, they went through a whole brand identity campaign. A part of that was asking ourselves this question: why do we exist? You know, we've grown as a company. We're not the same company we were in the 80s or the 90s or even in 2000. And so it was a great time for people to look at why we're here. And what we came up with was why we exist, our purpose, regardless of your title, of how long you've been with the company, was 3 reasons. You are here to engage, to entertain, and inspire the people that you work with and the people that come to stay and play at our properties. So if this was an in-person workshop, I would pause right here and I would have each of you take a couple minutes to start to define your why. Why does your company exist? Why are you here and where are you going? So if you want, I encourage you to pause the video now, get your thoughts down on some paper. It might not be your completed mission statement, but at least this is something to get you thinking, or you can start to make notes for something that you can come back to later as homework. So once you've started to think about why are we here, why do we exist? The next question is, well, what makes you different from everyone else? You know, how will your employees, how will your customers differentiate you from your competitors? Let me circle back to that Southwest example. Remember, their purpose was to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel, right? That's what we're doing because our vision is they want to be the world's most loved, most efficient, and most profitable airline. So Simon Sinek is another author I really like. Once again, if you're a reader, Start With Why. I highly recommend it. But in his book, Start With Why, he gives a great example of how Southwest takes action and makes decisions based on their purpose. So to be the low-cost air travel, right? That's what they want to differentiate them from other airlines. He tells the story about how a flight attendant was getting clients, customers that were asking for chicken sandwiches on flights. So she asked her boss, why don't we offer chicken sandwiches on flights? And her boss responds, if we started doing that, could we still be the low-cost airline? And she said no. And he said, well, that's why we don't do it. Right? So that's what differentiates us from our competitors. There are airlines that offer a wider variety of food than Southwest does, right? But what differentiates them and what's in their purpose and mission statement is to be the low-cost airline. So an example from my own world, when I was at MGM Resorts prior to coming to Flagstaff, I had moved around a lot with the company because I worked there for, oh gosh, about 9 years. Most of the time I was there though, I worked at the Excalibur. And if you've never been, let me tell you, working every day in a castle is awesome. Like, how seriously can you take yourself when you go to work in a castle every day? But working at the Excalibur, so a little history for those that might not know, the Excalibur opened in 1991. And I had the opportunity to be a part of a process that was really exclusive to the castle. In addition to MGM Resorts as a corporation, thinking about what their identity, what their culture was, we were also having very similar conversations at the property level to define our identity. Who are we? Who is our customer? How do we differentiate ourselves from all these other casinos and hotels in Las Vegas? So these conversations that we were having, you know, we weren't opening. We weren't a new business. We'd been around for about 15 years. And as I was new and coming on to the property, Many of the employees that I talked with had been at the Excalibur since day one, since they were the new shiny property on the block in 1991. And remember, in the last couple years, from 2005 on, they had really undergone a lot of change by becoming part of this huge organization. So some of the comments I was hearing from our employees was they were upset that, the MGM Grand or the Mirage or the Bellagio were stealing our Excalibur customers. My first reaction, my thought process was someone that is coming to visit Las Vegas, I don't necessarily see them weighing staying at the Excalibur against staying at the Bellagio. Perhaps I might weigh staying at the Excalibur against staying at the Tropicana or Flamingo, and the Bellagio perhaps against the Aria or Wynn, but it was very clear to me, and it was very clear to our leadership, that we really needed a reset to define for all of us who we are and who our customer is. So we hosted day-long sessions with all of our managers to talk about the Excalibur brand, the Excalibur culture, and what made us different for everyone else. Most of that day was spent talking about our core values. For example, when I started at the Excalibur, we had 4 core values. One of them was fun, which I loved, right? As I said earlier, you work in a castle. It should be fun. So how does that core value of fun differentiate us from others? Let me go back to this Bellagio example. I can guarantee you fun is not one of their core values. I don't mean to say that if you work or stay there, you won't have fun, but they have prioritized other core values there. So how does the core value of fun drive decisions that are made at the Excalibur? A great example of this is Dick's Last Resort. Dick's Last Resort is located at the castle, at the Excalibur, not at Bellagio. If you don't know what Dick's Last Resort is, pause this right now and Google it. I will say their whole thing is, their name is Dick's Last Resort. I wouldn't go there expecting a 5-star dining experience. If you asked for napkins, you probably will get a stack of them thrown at you. So Dick's Last Resort is something that's located at the Excalibur, not at the Bellagio. We used to joke in new employee orientation at the Excalibur that we were home to the largest Dick's in North America. I guarantee they don't share facts like that at the Bellagio. The Bellagio, to maintain their 5-star, 5-diamond rating, needs to talk about other information. So I hope that from these couple examples, it gives you something to think about in defining how your company culture is different from others. So speaking of new employees, another question for you to get clear on is, what are the top qualities I am looking for in a new employee? So we've thought about what's your why. Why does your company, your product exist? What makes you different from your competitors? Now, what are you looking for when you bring people into your company? At the time I went to the Disney Institute and learned about their service culture, I learned that before people can even apply to be a cast member, they have to watch a video about what it means to be a cast member. I found that so interesting, that starting sort of indoctrinating people into their culture before you can even apply for a job. Even in the language that they use, they don't call their employees employees, they're called cast members. My last year living and working in Las Vegas, I was based at the Luxor, and we were going through a rebranding campaign around service delivery, and we were trying to change the language and the culture, moving from the word employee to memory makers. So as we hired on new people, a front desk clerk, for example, it wasn't just about, can you check somebody in 4 minutes or less? Because that's the industry standard. It was, how friendly are you? Do you use the guest name, right? So asking some different behavioral interview questions. So this is something for you to think about. And in fact, I encourage you once again to either pause or take a moment here and write down what are a couple of those qualities that you're looking for as you bring people onto your company. That exercise is going to build onto this next exercise around your core values. So this values exercise, all of you should have received a PDF document that you can download with a list of core values on them. And in full transparency, Brene Brown, who I'm a huge fan of and all of her work, her latest book called Dare to Lead. If you Google Brene Brown or Dare to Lead, you'll find her Dare to Lead hub of resources where you can download for free things like this values activity. In addition to this values activity, on that website, she also has a Dare to Lead book club kind of worksheet to go along. She also has a how to operationalize your core values activity, which I highly encourage you to use. But first things first, before we think about operationalizing our core values, we have to define what those are. So best practice for organizations are you should have anywhere between 3 to 4 core values. When I worked at Excalibur, as I mentioned earlier, we had 4 core values. MGM Resorts International as an entire company has 3 core values that is expected of everybody. They are teamwork, integrity, and excellence. Now I work at Northern Arizona University, and of course higher ed has to be different. We have 6 core values at Northern Arizona University. They are student-centered, integrity, diversity, service, excellence, and discovery. So what I highly encourage you to do is looking at that value sheet. This is important stuff because core values shouldn't change every 6 months or every year. These are something that maybe you reevaluate every 5 to 10 years. So looking at that sheet of core values, in addition to those qualities that you wrote down that you're looking for in new employees, I would suggest you circling, highlighting, underlining 5 to 7 of those core values. And then once you're ready really to narrowing it down, I would go back, look at that list, and choose the top 3 or 4 core values that you feel best represent who you are, who your company is, and who you want to work with you. Once you have those core values defined as to what they are, now we can move to the next step, which is, what does that value look like? This is where, how do we put that value into practice? So, integrity is a core value. Great. What does that mean? What does that look like? This is your opportunity to then link that core value to behaviors. One of the things that the NAU marketing team did with the rollout of those 6 core values was they created I statements. So for example, under integrity, it would say something like, I hold myself to the highest ethical standards. Under excellence, I choose to make every moment count. Under discovery, I embrace and look for new technologies, right? So it's how do I link what that core value is to behaviors? What does that look like in the workplace then? And then the next piece to that, so I have my core values, I have what it looks like, is how do I reinforce and reward those behaviors that I'm looking for? And there's many ways to do that. One is have recognition and incentive programs. In human resources, just in my own department at NAU, every month we have peers vote on each other for who's displaying those core values. We actually have, because we're the NAU Lumberjacks, so we have a tree cookie that's a traveling trophy that goes from office to office for whoever wins. That is a great way to reinforce not only what the core value is, but those behaviors that go along with that core value. An incentive program. You could also link those core values and the behaviors to performance appraisals. So if the mission of your company is here's what we do, here's why we exist, the core values piece is how do we achieve that? How do we get there? That's that earlier when I talked about the Harvard Business Review article, the core values is that culture of what are the group norms and that shared activity. How do we treat each other? How do we treat our customers? So in performance appraisals, we should absolutely be grading people and giving feedback on how well they're doing at exhibiting those behaviors, writing those behaviors into their goals. So I know I've given you quite a bit to think about this morning, hopefully. I just want to end by letting you know that this is your opportunity, and it is an exciting opportunity to create what you want for your company. It's work to do this, but it is meaningful, it is impactful. of all the lives that you come in contact with, your employees, your customers, potential customers, you know, the work that you may do in the community. And I'm here to help. Please feel free to reach out to me. You should have my contact information. I think this is so exciting and such an amazing opportunity for then you to build the rest of your human resources functions on. So thank you.